the gardener's memory. The morning shift alarm echoed through the corridors of Obsidian Point, but Mira Thorne was already awake, her fingers tracing the edges of a crystalline fragment that caught the artificial dawn light streaming through her laboratory's viewport. The mining station rotated slowly against the backdrop of the Helix Nebula, but Mira's attention was fixed on the small, translucent crystal in her palm, one of the few remaining pieces of Zephyr. 3 years had passed since the Ethrosian had vanished from her life, yet the scent crystals they'd left behind still pulsed with faint emotional resonance. On Ethros, feelings became tangible things, crystalline formations that captured joy, sorrow, love, and loss in geometric perfection. This particular crystal held the essence of their last conversation, a bittersweet blend of affection tinged with an anxiety Mira had been too naive to understand at the time. She placed the crystal carefully back in its environmental case and moved through her laboratory, past rows of hybrid plants that shouldn't exist. Her xenobotanical research had taken an unexpected turn when Zephyr arrived on the station 4 years ago as part of a cultural exchange program. The Ethrosian had taught her how Earth flora could be modified to respond to emotional frequencies, creating gardens that bloomed brighter in happiness and wilted in sorrow. The empathic roses were her favorite, earth roses grafted with Ethrosian nerve moss that caused their petals to shift color based on the emotions of those nearby. When Zephyr had been here, the roses had blazed in deep crimsons and warm golds. Now they remained a subdued pink, reflecting Mira's careful emotional control. "Another early morning, Dr. Thorne?" came a voice from the doorway. Mira turned to see Station Commander Holloway, a gruff man who'd grown accustomed to her unconventional work schedule. "The plants don't observe human sleep cycles," Mira replied, adjusting the nutrient feeds to a cluster of singing vines, another of her and Zephyr's collaborative creations. The vines hummed softly when content, their melody once harmonizing, perfectly with Zephyr's natural bioluminescent patterns. Holloway stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. "Any word from the Ethrosian delegation? It's been 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, Mira finished, not looking up from her work. "No, no word." The commander nodded awkwardly. The entire station had been fond of Zephyr, whose gentle nature and fascinating insights into bio-emotional resonance had made them something of a celebrity among the usually isolated mining crew. Their sudden departure had left more than just Mira with questions. As Holloway left, Mira returned to her routine, but her mind wandered to that final night. Zephyr had seemed agitated, their usually steady bioluminescence flickering erratically. They'd spoken in whispers about complications back home and decisions that couldn't be delayed. Mira had pressed for details, but Zephyr had only generated more of those anxiety-laced crystals, their emotional signature growing increasingly distressed. The next morning, Zephyr was gone. No farewell message, no forwarding coordinates, just empty quarters and a collection of scent crystals that still held traces of their presence. Fragments of a relationship that had grown from professional collaboration into something deeper than either species was supposed to experience. Mira touched another crystal, this one holding their first shared moment of wonder when they'd successfully created a flower that bloomed only in the presence of cross-species affection. The memory was so vivid she could almost smell Zephyr's natural ozone and starlight scent, could almost see their silver skin shimmering with pleased patterns. She shook her head, focusing on the present. The Helix Nebula's mining operations wouldn't wait for her nostalgia, and her research into emotional botanics had applications beyond personal heartbreak. But as she worked, the crystals continued their faint pulsing, keeping time with a heart 3 sectors away, if Zephyr still lived at all. Outside her viewport, the nebula's colors shifted from purple to gold, painting the laboratory in alien hues. Somewhere in that vast cosmic garden, answers waited among the stars. An unexpected return. The solar storm hit Obsidian Point without warning, turning the nebula's gentle glow into a chaotic light show that sent the station's systems into emergency mode. Mira was alone in her laboratory, working late on a new strain of Harmony moss, when the power fluctuated and the containment fields around her more sensitive specimens began to waver. She rushed to stabilize the environmental controls, her hands moving quickly across the holographic interfaces. The empathic roses were already responding to her stress, their petals darkening to deep burgundy. It was then, in the midst of the emergency lighting's harsh red glow, that she caught a familiar scent, ozone and starlight, impossibly present in her sealed laboratory. "Hello, Mira." She spun around, her heart stopping as she saw the figure standing in the shadows near the viewport. Zephyr looked exactly as they had 3 years ago. Tall and willowy, with silver skin that rippled with bioluminescent patterns, and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold the depth of space itself. But something was different. The patterns on their skin flickered erratically, and new scent crystals were forming around them, jagged, darker formations that spoke of fear and pain. "You're not real," Mira whispered, her scientific mind rejecting what her heart desperately wanted to believe. "The storm, the electromagnetic interference, I'm hallucinating." Zephyr stepped forward, and immediately the singing vines began to hum, not their usual contented melody, but something more complex, layered with harmonics of joy and sorrow intertwined. The empathic roses burst into brilliant gold and crimson, their petals practically glowing with the intensity of Mira's conflicted emotions. "The plants remember me," Zephyr said softly, their voice carrying that same melodic quality that had haunted Mira's dreams. "As do you." Mira's hands trembled as she reached out, stopping just short of touching Zephyr's face. "Where have you been? Why did you leave without—" "I had no choice." Zephyr's skin patterns pulsed with distress, and more of those dark crystals materialized in the air around them. "My people discovered our relationship. Cross-species emotional bonding is forbidden on Ethros. It creates resonance patterns that interfere with our collective consciousness." "That's ridiculous," Mira said, but even as she spoke, she could see the pain in Zephyr's expression. "Love doesn't— Love between our species creates something new," Zephyr interrupted, gesturing to the hybrid plants surrounding them. "Something our elders feared would change us fundamentally. They gave me a choice: exile from Ethros forever, or return and undergo emotional severing, complete removal of all feelings associated with you." The words hit Mira like a physical blow. She sank into her desk chair, the weight of 3 years of wondering suddenly replaced by the crushing knowledge of Zephyr's sacrifice. "So you chose exile." "I chose you," Zephyr corrected, moving closer. "But I was a coward. I couldn't bear to see the pain in your eyes when I told you we could never return to Ethros together. So I ran." Around them, the laboratory had become a symphony of emotional response. The Harmony moss was generating crystalline formations at an unprecedented rate, creating a light show that rivaled the storm outside. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the intensity of their reunion. 3 years, Mira said, her voice barely audible. "I thought you were dead. I thought I'd imagined what we had." Zephyr knelt beside her chair, their silver skin now pulsing with patterns Mira remembered, the slow, steady rhythm that meant deep affection. "Every day away from you was agony. I tried to build a new life on the outer rim, but everywhere I went, I carried these." They gestured to a cluster of crystals that had formed around their feet, beautiful, clear formations that held the essence of their shared memories. "Show me," Mira whispered. Zephyr touched one of the crystals, and suddenly the laboratory filled with the scent memory of their first successful hybrid. the night they'd created the dreaming orchid, a flower that bloomed only in the presence of mutual understanding between different species. Mira could feel the echo of that moment, the wonder, the connection, the first spark of something deeper than professional collaboration. "I've been monitoring the station's communications," Zephyr admitted. "I know about your research, the papers. You've published. You've done incredible work." "Our work," Mira corrected, standing and finally allowing herself to touch Zephyr's face. Their skin was warm, real, solid. It was always our work. But even as they embraced, Mira noticed something troubling. Zephyr's eyes kept darting to the viewport, scanning the storm-tossed space beyond. Their bioluminescent patterns would occasionally spike with what looked like terror before settling back into the gentler rhythms of affection. "What aren't you telling me?" Mira asked, pulling back to study Zephyr's face. For a moment, Zephyr's composure cracked, and their skin flashed with rapid, chaotic patterns. "Nothing," they said too quickly. "I'm just adjusting. It's been so long." But as the storm began to subside outside, Mira caught a glimpse of something in Zephyr's expression, the same haunted look they'd worn that final night 3 years ago. Whatever had driven them away the first time wasn't finished with them yet. The false dawn, for 2 weeks, Obsidian Point felt alive in ways it never had before. Mira threw herself into collaborative work with Zephyr with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if creating enough beauty together could somehow anchor them against whatever forces had torn them apart before. They established a new section of the laboratory, the synthesis garden, where Ethrosian emotional crystallography merged with Earth's botanical resilience. The centerpiece was a grove of resonance trees, saplings that grew taller and stronger when exposed to harmonious emotional frequencies between different species. Under Mira and Zephyr's combined care, the trees had grown 3 feet in just 10 days, their bark shimmering with veins of crystalline deposits that pulsed in rhythm with their creators' heartbeats. "Your people would find this fascinating," Mira said one evening as they watched the tree's bioluminescent display. She was lying against Zephyr's chest in the observation alcove they'd created, feeling the gentle vibration of their natural frequencies. Zephyr's skin patterns flickered, a brief shadow of distress before settling back into contentment. "My former people," they corrected quietly. "I told you, I chose exile." "But surely they'd want to see what we've accomplished. This proves that cross-species emotional bonding doesn't destroy. It creates." Mira gestured to the garden around. Them, where dozens of hybrid species thrived in impossible combinations. "You don't understand," Zephyr said, their voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The Ethrosian Council doesn't see creation. They see contamination. They believe that emotional bonds between species will eventually lead to the dissolution of our collective consciousness, that we'll lose what makes us Ethrosian." Mira turned to face them fully. "And what do you believe?" Zephyr's bioluminescence pulsed in slow, thoughtful patterns. "I believe that consciousness isn't about purity. It's about connection. Look at what we've built together." They touched a nearby crystal formation, and it resonated with a deep musical note. "This could never have existed without both of our influences. It's not Ethrosian or human. It's something entirely new." As if responding to their words, the resonance trees began to hum, their crystalline veins brightening. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, a harmony that seemed to bridge the gap between 2 entirely different forms of life. But even in these perfect moments, Mira noticed Zephyr's anxiety. They would startle at unexpected sounds, their skin patterns spiking with fear before they consciously controlled them. During their work, Zephyr's eyes would drift to the laboratory's entrances, and they insisted on keeping the external communications array disabled to avoid interference with the emotional resonance experiments. "Who are the collectors?" Mira asked one night, the question surprising even herself. Zephyr went completely still, their bioluminescence cutting out entirely, something Mira had never seen before. "Where did you hear that name?" "You've been talking in your sleep," Mira said gently. "Fragments, mostly. But you keep mentioning collectors and something about harvesting patterns." For a long moment, Zephyr said nothing. Then slowly, their skin began to glow again, but the patterns were chaotic, fearful. "There are beings who feed on pure emotional essence," they whispered. "They move through the outer systems, taking individuals with strong emotional signatures. The Ethrosian Council has been negotiating with them." "Negotiating?" Mira felt a chill run down her spine. "Providing them with exiles and criminals in exchange for leaving our core worlds alone." Zephyr's voice was hollow. "I thought I'd escaped them by coming here to the inner systems, but emotional bonds like ours, they create signals that travel across vast distances." The implications hit Mira like a physical blow. "That's why you're really here. Not because you chose me, because you're running." "Both," Zephyr said desperately, reaching for her hands. "I came here because this is where I want to be, but yes, I'm also hiding. The work we're doing, the emotional resonance we're generating, it's like a beacon. If the collectors are still searching for me, then we'll fight them," Mira said firmly. "Together. We'll warn the station, prepare defenses. You don't understand." Zephyr's skin patterns were now cycling through rapid, panicked sequences. "They don't just take individuals. They harvest entire emotional networks. Everyone I've formed bonds with becomes a target." The garden around them seemed to sense their distress. The empathic roses had turned nearly black, and the singing vines had fallen silent. Even the resonance trees had dimmed, their crystalline veins pulsing irregularly. That night, they created their most ambitious project yet, a memory flower that could store and replay emotional experiences in their full complexity. As they worked together, pouring their combined feelings into the delicate crystalline petals, Mira felt a profound sense of completion. This was what they were meant to do together, create impossible beauty from the intersection of their different natures. The flower bloomed just as Obsidian Point's artificial aurora began its nightly display, painting the laboratory in cascades of green and gold light. For a moment, everything was perfect. Zephyr's bioluminescence synchronized with the aurora patterns, and their skin showed the deep, steady rhythms that meant pure happiness. "I love you," Mira whispered, the words carrying weight they'd never spoken aloud before. "And I love you," Zephyr replied, their voice harmonizing with the hum of their creations around them. "In ways my people never imagined possible." They fell asleep in the observation alcove, surrounded by their hybrid garden, the memory flower pulsing gently beside them like a crystalline heart. But even in sleep, Zephyr's patterns never fully settled, flickering occasionally with the rapid fire of deep, unshakable fear. Outside, something dark moved between the stars, drawn by the brilliant emotional beacon that two lovers had unknowingly created in their desperate attempt to build a world where they could exist together. Following the scent trail, the stolen research vessel Synthesis cut through hyperspace like a shard of desperate hope, its hull modifications allowing it to track the crystalline emotional signatures that conventional sensors couldn't detect. Mira had worked for 36 hours straight, converting Zephyr's message into a navigation system that could follow the trail of harvested consciousness across the void. The weeping veil emerged from hyperspace as a twisted cathedral of dark matter and electromagnetic storms, the perfect hiding place for something that didn't belong to normal space-time. Mira's improvised sensors immediately detected what she was looking for, a massive structure that existed partially in their dimension and partially somewhere else, feeding on the boundary between realities. The collector ship was beautiful in the way that predators often were, all flowing curves and bioluminescent patterns that mimicked the very emotional resonances it consumed. As Mira approached, she could feel it trying to feed on her fear and determination, drawing sustenance from the very emotions driving her rescue attempt. But Mira had prepared for this. The cargo hold of her ship contained the entire synthesis: garden, every hybrid plant, every emotional crystal, every creation she and Zephyr had built together. If the collectors fed on emotional energy, she would give them more than they could possibly digest. "This is Dr. Mira Thorne of Obsidian Point Station," she broadcast on all frequencies. "I know you have Zephyr of Ethros. I'm here to negotiate and exchange." The response came not as words, but as a direct invasion of her consciousness, alien thoughts pressing against her mind like ice water. The collectors were ancient beings from the spaces between galaxies, creatures of pure hunger that had learned to sustain themselves on the emotional complexity of younger species. "You offer yourself in place of the Ethrosian," the voice whispered, directly into her thoughts. "But you misunderstand. We do not trade, we take. And soon, we take everything." Images flooded Mira's mind, the true scope of the collector's plan. They had been building toward this for centuries, positioning harvest. Ships around dozens of systems, waiting for the right moment to drain entire civilizations of their emotional essence. The energy would fuel their journey to the next galaxy, leaving behind empty husks of former worlds. "I have something better than an exchange," Mira said, fighting against the mental invasion. "I have a gift." She triggered the cargo bay doors, releasing the entire synthesis garden into space. The hybrid plants, sustained by contained atmospheric bubbles and crystal-powered life support, began to bloom in the vacuum. But these weren't ordinary flowers. They were emotional amplifiers, designed to resonate with and magnify the feelings of those around them. The effect on the collector ship was immediate and catastrophic. The carefully controlled feeding systems that allowed them to digest emotional energy were suddenly overwhelmed by an impossible flood of pure, concentrated feeling. The ship's bioluminescent patterns began to flicker wildly as it tried to process the torrent of emotional data. Mira used the distraction to dock with the collector vessel, her ship's modified sensors guiding her to the ship's emotional core. A vast chamber where dozens of beings from across the galaxy hung suspended in crystalline cocoons, their consciousness slowly being drained. She found Zephyr near the center, their silver skin dim and flickering, but still alive. Around them she could see others, beings she didn't recognize from worlds she'd never heard of, all united in their shared captivity. "The amplification won't last long," Mira whispered as she began cutting Zephyr free. "We need to move." But Zephyr's eyes were focused on something beyond the immediate rescue. "Not just us," they said weakly. "All of them. The collectors have been building this network for decades. If we don't stop them here, then we stop them," Mira said firmly. Working together, they began releasing the other prisoners. But the process was slow, and the collectors were already adapting to the emotional overload. Mira could feel the alien intelligence reasserting control, beginning to turn the amplified emotions back into sustenance. That's when Zephyr did something impossible. Instead of trying to escape the emotional resonance field, they embraced it, opening themselves completely to the amplified feelings of dozens of different species. Their skin blazed with bioluminescent patterns more complex than anything Mira had ever seen. Not just Ethrosian emotional language, but a universal grammar of feeling that transcended species boundaries. The effect rippled through the collector ship like a virus of consciousness. The harvested beings began to resonate in harmony, their combined emotional signatures creating something the collectors had never encountered. A collective consciousness based not on uniformity, but on diversity. Not on consumption, but on creation. The by. Collectors, beings evolved to feed on isolated emotional experiences, couldn't process this new form of consciousness. Their feeding systems overloaded completely, and the ship began to tear itself apart as contradictory energy patterns fought for dominance. "We have to go!" Mira shouted, but Zephyr shook their head. "Someone has to guide them home," they said, gesturing to the other freed prisoners. "Someone who can speak their emotional languages." Mira understood. In the chaos of the ship's collapse, dozens of beings from different worlds would be stranded in space, traumatized and lost. But Zephyr, transformed by their contact with the amplified emotional network, had become something new, a living translator who could guide them back to their respective homes. They made it to the escape pods just as the collector ship folded in on itself, its impossible geometry collapsing as the emotional paradox they had created tore it apart. But they were not alone. Nearly 40 beings from across the galaxy filled the escape pods, all linked by the emotional resonance network that Zephyr maintained. 6 months later, Mira stood in the rebuilt synthesis garden aboard a ship that no longer belonged to any single world or species. The Harmony traveled from system to system, returning the rescued beings to their homes while documenting the collector threat. What they had discovered at the Weeping Veil was only one ship. There were others, and they were still out there. But they were no longer alone in fighting them. Each world they visited, each person they returned, became part of a growing network of awareness. The galaxy was learning to recognize the signs of collector presence, and more importantly, it was learning that emotional connection across species wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was a strength that could not be consumed. Zephyr approached. From the ship's observation deck, their skin patterns now incorporating elements from dozens of different species, a living testament to the emotional bonds they had helped forge. In their hands was a new crystal formation, one that pulsed with the harmonized feelings of beings from across the known galaxy. "Ready for the next system?" they asked, though the crystal in their hands already held Mira's answer. She smiled, watching as the empathic roses responded to their shared contentment by blooming in colors that had never existed before their two species had learned to love. Outside the viewport, hyperspace swirled with possibility, and somewhere in that vast darkness, other voices were learning to sing in harmony. "Always," Mira said, and meant it. Together they had discovered that love wasn't just something to be protected. It was something to be shared, spread across the stars like seeds of hope in an infinite garden. The scent of their combined presence filled the ship. No longer the simple ozone and starlight of Ethros or the green growing things of Earth, but something entirely new, something that smelled like coming home.